Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I think one of the sad things about Africa is the way we fail to learn from the past. We keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. This is really sad. This is tragic. I'd like you to listen to this video clip of one of Africa's great leaders, the late Nelson Mandela.
Men and women all over the world come and go. Some leave nothing behind, not even their name. It would appear that they never lived at all. Others do leave something behind. The haunting memory of the evil deeds they committed against other human beings. Various kinds of theft, robbery, malicious injury to property, denial of human rights, simply because people are of a different color to you. Torture, imprisonment without trial, and political assassinations. Every time the names of such people are mentioned, even at the height of their power, with all the glittering symbols of power, they are like a grave, beautiful outside, rotten inside.
Those are the haunting words of Nelson Mandela. He was, of course, speaking of the white racist regime. But if you fast forward to Zimbabwe today, 43 years, 44 years after independence, we are experiencing exactly the same thing, only this time, of course, it's black on black. This is really tragic. Benjamin, welcome to the program.
Good day to you. Thank you for having me. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us.
What do you read from Mandela's voice from the grave?
It's quite sad, really. It's very heartbreaking. But I mean, we are experiencing this on a day-to-day basis now. You know, when we thought things would get better, you know, ever since, you know, people waged up the war against minority rule, you would have thought that, you know, things were looking up for our race, not just as Zimbabwe, but as a continent as a whole. But, you know, little did we know that, you know, decades later, we would find ourselves in this here position where we are now crying, against the oppression of our own brothers. You know, it's really sad. It's just, you know, doom and gloom for the whole continent. Let me just say.
Yeah, I think one of the tragedies of this situation, which would make Nelson Mandela turn in his grave, is that this is happening. But more specifically, that in the case of Zimbabwe, it is happening And it is none other than the party he himself was president of, ANC, that is propping up Zanu PF across the river in Popo. In his lifetime, it must be said, Nelson Mandela condemned Robert Mugabe's tyrannical rule. But those who followed behind him have done a lot worse. If you look at what has been happening in South Africa, there is no doubt that Zanu PF has relied on ANC corrupt leaders to keep it in power. There's no doubt that ANC under Ramaphosa propped up this Zanu PF regime. The regional body condemned the 2023 elections. The continental body condemned the 2023 elections. But it was none other than the South African government itself that turned a blind eye to it. And I believe that its influence was quite significant in making the regime get away with the rigged elections. I think it is tragic. I don't know whether you want to comment on any of the other issues on that point, Benjamin.
Yes, I do agree. I mean, we know, ANC, or let's just say South Africa, is a powerhouse when it comes to, let's just say, Africa as a continent, and particularly SADC as an organization. Or I do believe they had a major role to play in propping up Zanu PF and letting things continue as they are with Zanu PF, such that if by condemning Zanu PF they would have shown their weakness as well. So they would rather have Zanu PF as a benchmark to say, but we didn't do as bad as these guys, So I honestly believe ANC has been very selfish when it comes to their decision making towards Zimbabwe, where you find they themselves as a country, or South Africa, they do enjoy the basic human rights, and yet they are denying another country or other citizens of another country that same right by supporting this Zanu PF regime that has clearly been abusing every single human right possible. And sometimes it's just amazing to see what people will do to keep themselves into power, the amount of oppression they would subject other individuals to, just so that they continue to rule. It's really, really sad and pathetic.
I totally subscribe to that, and I think the other point here that we should not forget before we leave this subject is the fact that in the 43 years or 44 years now, Zimbabwe has had many opportunities to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. None more so than during the 2008 to 2013 GNU, and we messed it up. As a nation, we cannot pretend that we did not have the opportunity to end this dictatorship. We had a golden one. During the GNU, we had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms and end the Zanu PF dictatorship. We did not. What happened is Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends with the trappings of high office. And in return, they forgot all about the reforms, and hence landing us into this mess. It is important that while we blame South Africa and the ANC government for propping up Zanu PF, that we also look in the mirror and see who really is more responsible for our own mess. And we are responsible for our own mess. Zanu PF itself for being the tyrants that they've become. They've become the worst oppressors of their own fellow black Zimbabweans than the whites were. And then the opposition for selling out when they had the opportunity to implement the democratic reforms and end the Zanu PF dictatorship. But the third point I would like also to mention here is that we, the ordinary citizen, are responsible too. Much more so the intellectuals among the private citizens. We have watched Zanu PF ride roughshod over the people, denying them their fundamental rights. And many of the intellectuals out there have said nothing. At West, many of them have actually joined Zanu PF. If you can't join them, if you can't beat them, join them kind of mentality. And Zanu PF, Robert Mugabe, and now Emerson Mnangagwa has never had any problems at all recruiting the intellectuals to help him prop up the dictatorship. And the same, and many of the intellectuals have been working with the opposition, knowing fully well that the opposition sold out, knowing fully well that participating in these flawed elections was going to give Zanu PF legitimacy, but they played along because most of them are looking at, by being active in the opposition, they too will get onto the gravy train. And that's all they cared about. We cannot deny that Zimbabwe is in a mess because of our own doing. I think that's the big message I would like to leave before we leave this video. I don't know whether Ben, you would like to say anything more on the video before we leave it.
Well, in conclusion, I would say, we are, the architects of our own downfall. How? Through blind loyalty. I mean, I get the point. We all have the right of association, and we have the right to choose which political organization we would want to follow, or who would want us to at least lead at some point. But I mean, we got to look at how toxic the environment is. The Zimbabwean political environment is. There is nothing possibly good that can come out of such a toxic environment without us having to first, purge the environment first, and then we can have transparency. So I honestly believe we could have, as a people or as individuals, we could have done better in some of our choices, and in thinking for ourselves, not waiting for somebody to come and spoon feed us whatever doctrine they have. So yes, I agree with you to say, we are mostly to blame for the downfall. Yes, we can look for outside elements, but once you look at the inside, you will probably find out that we are mostly responsible for this mess that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. I would like to play this video by I think most people would know him, Professor Lumumba. And I think he's saying something that is very relevant and it will be more applicable to the ordinary citizens. What we, the ordinary citizens, have reduced ourselves into. Just listen to this.
Kakistocracy is the government of the very worst. You are led by your very worst. That is kakistocracy. If you combine that with kleptocracy, which is a government of thieves, then you can see why Africa continued to punch below her weight. In all areas, we continue to do so. So that many Africans have now surrendered. What they are remaining with is prayer and fasting. Africans pray for what they can work for. That is not the divine instruction. We have converted God into an operator of a lottery and a casino. In Africa, we have some of the lowest quality politicians. African countries say that they are democratic, they are kakistocratic. And kakistocracy is the government of the very worst. You are led by your very worst. That is kakistocracy. If you combine that with kleptocracy, which is a government of thieves, then you can see why Africa continued to punch below her weight. In all areas, we continue to do so. So that many Africans have now surrendered. What they are remaining with is prayer and fasting.
I'll stop right there. Benjamin, I don't know whether you've got any take from that video. Any comments?
I would say, this is exactly what we are. We are now relying on just hope and sometimes to an extent of false belief that whatever we are doing the right. I think this is why I was always saying, why I always say, let's stop and think. That is all I have to say.
Thank you, Benjamin. Well, I would like to re-emphasize the point I made earlier on, that I think most Zimbabweans here, ordinary citizens, have contributed to the country's mess. We, the ordinary people, really have become so naive and gullible that we believe anything. And in this particular case, I totally agree with Professor Lumumba when he says that God does not do for men what men can do for themselves. Holding our corrupted, incompetent leaders to account is not beyond our own powers. And yet, we always seem to like surrendering that responsibility and praying that things will change. That is really tragic. We are our own masters. After independence, we became our own masters, the masters of our own destiny. Whether we were ready for it or not, it's now irrelevant. The point is, we, the people, should be the one who decide the destiny of this country. And if we surrender to the corrupt and incompetent, then we only have ourselves to blame for it. The level of incompetence among the Zimbabwean has really reached now shocking levels. We have to ask ourselves, how are we going to get out of this situation? Zanu PF has been rigging elections repeatedly. I think most people will agree that Zanu PF will never reform itself out of office. They are deeply entrenched. So how are we going to end this dictatorship? The only way we're going to end it is by electing opposition leaders who will implement the democratic reforms. Some people mix that with they've got to be in government. No, the first step is implementing the reforms. You do not need to be in government to implement the reforms. The GNU clearly showed that. And last year, in the 2023 elections, we had another opportunity to get that done. The trap was, do not participate in the flawed election and give Zanu PF legitimacy. And that is exactly what the opposition did. And the mistake the ordinary citizen made is that he was conned into believing that the opposition would win big. That was naive, to say the least. Of course, you can't win big in an election that is so flawed that you do not even have something as basic as a verified voters roll. And we've compounded our own problem by coming up with this absolutely shocking and foolish idea that Chamisa is somehow an infallible demigod who should not be questioned, much let alone held to account. Chamisa is not an infallible demigod. He is a mere mortal, and for that matter, a corrupt and incompetent one. And it is shocking that even the intellectuals have fallen into that trap of considering him to be somehow infallible. It is a pity, because the truth of the matter is, without implementing the reforms and stopping Zanu PF rigging the elections, we are not going to get out of this mess. As I said, Zanu PF will never reform itself out of office. And if we've got an opposition that has surrendered, has stopped even making the effort of implementing the reforms, then we are stuck. And on the other hand, we've got an electorate that seems to think that the only way we're going to stop the Zanu PF dictatorship is for the opposition to get into power. You have to make the first step. The first step is to implement the reforms. And if you're not clever enough to realize that the opposition, after 23 years, without even a token reform in place, they will never implement any reforms, then you are in serious trouble. And we are in serious trouble. Thank you very much, Benjamin. I don't know whether you'd like to make your closing remarks there.
I think you have exhausted every point that needed to be touched upon. And once again, it all comes down to our own ability to think for ourselves and, to play back and see what we need to do or how we can change going forward. Because change has to begin with us. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, Benjamin, for joining us. And for the listeners, thank you very much for joining us. And good night to everybody.
Good night.